My name's Evelyn Trefon, and I own a small business in rural Alaska in New Haven, which is located off of Lake Iliamna, selling fresh fruits and vegetables. It used to be just a summertime gig to fill in my regular school-time job, but it's kind of evolved into a year-round operation now, operating at least once a month. And yeah, I'm happy to present more about that here in a few minutes.
Great, thanks. My name is Mike Jones. I'm an economist at the University of Alaska, Anchorage, in ICER, the Institute for Social and Economic Research. And I think my mandate was just to launch straight into it, so I'm going to do that. I want to first, housekeeping, Evelyn, can you guys all see the slide deck up? Great. And can you see the chat box up on my screen, or is that just for me? Okay, good. I was trying to see if I could monitor the chat while we're here, but we'll see how well I do that. So if something is in the chat and needs to be answered pretty quickly, someone please just unmute and tell me, okay?
I can
Uh,
monitor the chat for you too, Mike.
Please, thanks so much. And please just jump right in. So there are so many things that we could talk about in terms of difficulty shipping fresh food to off-road Alaska here, but this context is going to be like fairly high level, I think, and then we're going to talk about decision tools. So the mandate was to be as action oriented as possible. So these problems exist. We know qualitatively these problems exist. And we've been working through some of the quantitative data on that. Again, we won't spend as much time on that. We'll try to talk about what you do about it. Okay. We've seen in the news a lot of supply chain fragilities, if you will. I mean, and there's weather issues, runway issues, infrastructure issues, carrier disruptions. For example, I know Alaska Airlines went out one aircraft. They had a runway issue in Kodiak, and then all of a sudden, that was preventing mainline aircraft from being able to adequately even fly groceries to Nome. So we have this butterfly effect in the state that's really, really intense. And we have areas that are just really, really challenging. So St. Paul, for example, is in the news quite a bit. In the summer, we get low IFR conditions or instrument flight rating conditions, very low cloud ceiling, very low visibility. A lot of ground equipment needs to be working for planes to land properly in that context. Um, and it's frequently not working. There was a key, runway system that was out there that probably impacted the flow of planes. And then we also just have winter. It's just really, really cold, and we have a lot of touch points. We have runway time that matters. And so as we move through a supply chain system that involves what we call a multimodal system to get food out, you're fighting between time and temperature, essentially. And so as food is moving up to Alaska, the vast majority of food that we are buying is coming from outside of Alaska. And so it takes, 3 to 7 days, maybe 5 days ballpark to get to the port and offload it into a warehouse in some of these distributor warehouses you might be working with, the US Foods, Cisco, DiMatteo's, Charlie's, and whatnot. Just like if you were a grocery retailer warehouse, maybe the Anika warehouse or the Alaska Commercial Company warehouse. Then generally things get transferred onto a mainline cargo plane. But they don't necessarily leave Anchorage immediately. So I've seen produce, for example, that sat in the Anchorage airport and didn't get to Bethel for 8 days after it was dropped off. That's a really, really long time. It's not usually that bad, but it certainly can get that bad, even to the hub communities through the mainline cargo planes. And in Anchorage, there's a lot of freeze and chill facilities. They have massive refrigerators, they have massive freezers. Hopefully, they're using them. All the carriers are properly using them. But as you get out into the hub communities, you really lose a lot of that freeze and chill capacity. You're much more likely to see freezers out there than refrigerators. And so as food sits waiting for a weather window, or maybe it's just slammed and they brought in, several like tons and tons of up to 100 tons of goods at once might get brought to Bethel, get brought over to the Grant or Ryanair warehouse, and it just has to wait its turn. And so the conditions that food is waiting in are sometimes really challenging. There can be ambient. You might have multi-hour runway time. And if you're shipping through bypass, versus air freight, you have different levels of protection. Bypass mail, the subsidized mail system in the state, it represents about 25% of all air cargo pounds in the entire state. That's huge. And that could be anything from, gloves and napkins to oranges, potentially. And so we don't know exactly what's being transported in bypass. But we know a lot of people really rely on that subsidized mail system. It's about 57 cents a pound right now. Outside of that, you have air freight options. Now, why would you pay more for air freight? Well, in bypass, you have these regulatory restrictions. It's non-priority mail. It's supposed to be moved within 3 days of getting to a carrier. That is not always the case. There's not really a ton of oversight capability there. But also, it's what's known as a shipper's risk program. If you take that subsidy, it doesn't matter if it shows up black. That's on you by the letter of the law, unfortunately, with bypass mail. And so you don't have any of that liability protection. When people pay for air freight, they might be paying for a few things. One, it could be visibility and direct relationships with air carriers. And two, it could be some amount of recourse if something shows up and it's really in bad shape, and you have a viable argument for why it might have been the carrier's fault and they need to reimburse you. And so there's trade-offs in the ways that you can send out to the communities. There's only some communities that qualify for bypass, for example, and there's varying costs of air freight. It's clearly quite different, the cost per pound to ship food to Nome than it is to ship food to Gamble, right? And so if you're paying full retail for that flight, whereas in bypass mail, that's totally standardized. It's the exact same price. Okay, we talked a little about bypass. I was able to dig up. We had some jumps in bypass, which made the news. There's about a 9% jump in the last cost adjustment. It had been quite a while since there's been an adjustment. In general, the cost per pound of shipping through bypass seems to generally follow the consumer price index for transport in the Western US. The general inflation we've had is only about 37%, but transport costs have gone up a lot more than regular inflation, about 52%, which kind of matches that period over time. So as you're thinking about, okay, what could bypass cost and affect me as a shipper of food, paying attention to that CPI transport for the Western US, which I have linked here and I have sent out the slides afterwards, could be a good way to kind of anticipate those rate changes. Okay, so what happens to fresh produce along the way? We actually have some data insights from the Alaska Commercial Company. They've been really generous sharing data under an NDA, but we've talked about ways I can share that data. We actually have all the spoilage data by product, by month for every store going back for about 6 years. It's a super cool data set to work with. It's also pretty depressing to work with sometimes when you see the scale of what's lost. So for example, in Bethel, that's one flight. From Anchorage, there's a lot of flights per day. You get pretty good traffic out there. It gets immediately unloaded and brought in. For salad vegetables here, so combining a couple different food types, you're sitting in the ballpark of the mid to low single digits in terms of spoilage. If this were like Costco, for example, that would be a terrible shrink number. When we get into broader rural Alaska, it's actually not as bad as it could be. I will say that anytime you get on a plane and you're shipping by air, the cost or the produce spoilage seems to be significantly higher than any of their Southeast Alaska stores that are serviced directly by barge. The barges come directly up from Tacoma. So just getting on the first plane with those touch points and time and temperature shocks does affect things. But when you go from Bethel out to their store in Hooper Bay, the story changes a little bit, right? The scale even changes. I couldn't even, I had to adjust it. So the left side, it goes from 0 to 30%. The right side, it goes from 0 to 75%, even 80% per month of spoilage. So you see this really large number of events that are really over 25% spoilage. And so average spoilage here in Hooper Bay is sitting in the ballpark of 35%. And we see patterns in spoilage where on average it's going up much higher in the winter. You have less flight hours, you have more temperature shock on the runway. So you're probably leading to more delays and rougher conditions as things are being transferred. So you've got these trade-offs that are present. And so we've got to think about, okay, how do you choose? How do you send food to rural Alaska? One, you're choosing like what types of produce to send. I've heard apples and oranges described as bypass fruit. People say, listen, we only have a certain amount of budget. We have to fulfill a contract for school nutrition. We have to get some sort of fresh fruit out there to the kids. We're just going to pick the types of products that can take a punch through Alaska's really tough system. So, other products that are much more sensitive, grocery stores may still want to send them. Like do you want to strawberries, bananas are really challenging, especially in cold temperatures. Grapes, any herbs, mushrooms, for example. These can be very high shrink potential products and just very high cost per pound products. So the greater the cost per pound, the greater the potential spoilage rate, the more you're justified in paying more for something that helps you save and helps you reduce that spoilage. You're paying one way or the other. You're either paying more to ship it or you're absorbing those costs on the back end. And so, for example, as the AC store, you might have seen in the news, they started a program where they were direct shipping produce by air from Washington up to Alaska to skip the barge, to skip those first 5, 6 days. And at least what was reported in the media was that the program was almost paying for itself just in reduced spoilage. So that's kind of like a real life example of them paying substantially more to fly it by air, even up to Alaska. Not everyone can do that, obviously. That's a scale thing and big relationships. But at a micro level, there are some other trade-offs to think about. So, working with the Alaska Food Policy Center, I'm going to stop share real quick and adjust the screen that I'm sharing. Working with the Alaska Food Policy Center, uh, recently put together a, try not to share the screen where I have 40 tabs open, so I look like a gremlin. Okay. So I'm going to share this. Cool. All right. Can you see a web page, Evelyn? Can you give me like a thumbs up? Okay, cool. So try to develop a tool that people could use to think about these trade-offs and decide, okay, is this what method should I ship if I'm going to ship at all? So don't pay attention to the graph at first. Let's look in the left side. So we've got a couple things. It's all very dependent on your own context. About $1.50 a pound on average for produce cost is ballpark where the market's at. There's clearly higher cost per pound. You don't have to ship everything, for example, through the same manner. Like, for example, I know that a lot of the larger rural grocery stores, they're shipping some things through bypass and some things through air freight, depending on sort of what the cost trade-offs are and sort of how sensitive that product is. I actually know some folks that are also sending through priority mail. You can pay extra to ship produce through priority mail, and it seems to be working quite well. So, okay, you've got $1.50 a pound though, and you're like, okay, do I want to ship it through some base method? Let's call it bypass mail. So you've got some cost per pound. And then say you want to, your alternative rate is 85 cents a pound. That's pretty low. That would be like a mainline rate to one of the hubs, for example, in a lot of contexts. So we'll adjust this in a second. So this is sort of the cost comparison. What am I getting for a 29-cent a pound difference? What am I actually getting for that? Well, you have some sort of spoilage. You're trying to, frankly, save money by spoiling less of what's moving through. So say it was about 20% spoilage with bypass, and you expected that to be only 8% by working directly with air freight. So that's a 12% reduction in spoilage needed. This sort of says, okay, for 29 cents a pound, you need at least an 11.4 reduction in percent reduction in spoilage, percentage point reduction in spoilage, to be worth it, for it to pay for itself from reduced shrink. So it kind of gives a little recommendation. The alternative is likely worth it. And this is basically showing at this line, you interpret this as it gets more and more expensive, for your alternative, you need to be having a greater reduction in spoilage, right? You need to be spoiling less and less. So you don't get something for nothing. So this sort of maps that out. And in theory, your break-even point is kind of identified right here with the circle, and it's saying, okay, your expected reduction is a little above that. Now, say, for example, you were trying to ship to a community where it was more like $1.25 a pound to ship. And that's very normal to be that or higher. It's like, okay, well, that's a big jump. Now you have 69 cents a pound difference. What do I need? Well, I actually need greater than a 20% reduction in spoilage for that to make financial sense. Well, okay, that's not viable. You didn't have 20% spoilage in the first place. Now, so it would say, hey, unfortunately, shipping through your base method and absorbing those losses is optimal, unfortunately, here. It would be great if you got less losses, but it's not worth it to ship $1.25 just to save this amount. Even if it went to zero, it wouldn't be enough because you needed significantly higher than that. You needed about 27% reduction to be possible or to be financially viable. Now, if you were losing like 50% at baseline, then all of a sudden it changes, right? You need a 17% reduction in spoilage because the assumption is that as more and more is spoiling, you're having to pay not only the food cost, but the shipping costs to get back. So you're having to pay for everything twice and get it out there. So this kind of was developed as a tool to let folks make those trade-offs on their own and really critically think about that. I will stop there and stick this decision tool HTML in the chat. I was not, nobody jumped in. So if, how should we handle this? Should I do questions for myself now, or should we both do questions after Evelyn presents?
Maybe let's take a little bit to do questions right now if anything pops up, and then
Thanks.
yeah, just
Somebody mentioned in the chat about hydroponics for fresh veggies and great price savings overall. No, I'm actually really interested in the economics of hydroponics. Capital costs can be quite high. Energy costs can be pretty extreme. You might need a lot of kilowatt hours in the first place to heat in some environments, and the cost per kilowatt hour for commercial energy. You don't get to tap the same power cost equalization, the same PCE rates for commercials. So it's for sure that any sort of indoor ag or hydroponic system would vary. The economics would be super different around the state. But I'd love to see someone put together a broader analysis of that.
I
yeah.
know for here the kilowatt hour for New Haven, Iliamna, and Dalton is 65 cents per kilowatt hour.
So high.
Yeah,
And
and
that
that's
compares
kind of
to 10
cheap.
cents. And that
Yeah.
compares to 10 cents in Southeast where they have hydro. And so I don't think we're randomly seeing, these companies, pop up. And in Kodiak, I know there's some fairly successful operations, much milder climate there. So, there's some tension between market forces and what's allowed.
And we're 98% hydro as well, and we're still at
Oh,
65 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's
yeah,
yeah.
that's
It
tough.
looks like Carly had a question.
Please.
Yeah, I was just wondering about what happens to the food that arrives spoiled. Like, is it composted or used at all, or what happens to it?
So the data I have from the Alaska Commercial Company is what arrives and is not able to be like given away at all. The first thing I'll say is that I would love to see food pantries in rural Alaska have better relationships with grocery stores to be able to think about getting some of that fresh food that is still edible, but maybe not sellable in folks' hands. And sometimes I've seen, for example, a bag of tangerines. And you'll see some of them are bad, but not all of them are bad. I mean, we've all been to Costco in Anchorage, or most people have, and seen you get not 100% of things in a bag work. That doesn't mean you can't break it open, sell it individually, or break it open and sort of have it available for folks. So in general, there seems to be a really difficult mechanism moving food directly to people. Now, on the composting side, sometimes people just should not eat this, like at a certain point, right? And that's clearly possible. My understanding is it all goes to the dump. I've called a bunch of dumps actually in rural Alaska, trying to figure out like if you could save grocery stores money even running the truck there, like how much does it cost per truckload? Usually it seems like there's an annual subscription to the dump. And so it's really just sort of the man hours and the gas to drive that truck out there. Um, so I'm not aware of any sort of organized formal composting efforts in rural Alaska to move things out of like retail grocery, but it sounds like a good idea.
For me personally at my business, what I do is if there's like a rotten apple or something in a bag, I'll just break open that bag and then sell the individual apples. Or I'll sell it at like a 10% discount for the bag, which they know that they're getting at least one spoiled. If it's beyond sellable, there's two flocks of chickens in our communities, so then I just give it to the chicken people and they
Yeah.
feed it to their flocks. I also will I have a compost at my house, so then I'll throw it in my compost too. So I try not to let anything go to the dump, as much as I can possibly, whether if it can be consumed or by me, chickens, or the bugs, whatever works.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of it is like education, like, and like kind of talking to people about why it might be important to get stuff and then just there being a person who like wants to spend their time and efforts like getting rotten food and composting it, and it's a special person.
My suspicion is it's the more the latter, frankly. I think a lot of people do a lot of home growing. Off-road Alaska, there's a lot of home, farms. And so people I think are aware. I think it's mostly the difficulty coordinating with grocery stores. Because if you're a grocery store manager and you have rotten food, your first goal has to just be like, this food needs to get out of this store, And so as easy as possible as that can be, they're probably going to choose that. And so I think any mechanism that sort of formally links them has to be really reliable and really responsive, which is what you're talking about. I would like, who's that person? There is a human at the end of most of this. So yeah. And then you have wonderful people like Evelyn who are a little more independent, eh, you know, um, maybe like more sort of plugged into exactly what can be done with it. But there's a lot of plenty of places that are just the scale they're moving through means they have to move really quickly. So
All right, well, if there aren't any more questions right now, Evelyn, you want to do your presentation and I will share it. Let me see. If I can figure out how to do that. Oh my God.
while you're pulling that up, I'll just say that I forgot to mention one thing that I have posted in the chat, which is that we do have a dashboard product developed with the Alaska Food Policy Council and with Dewberry that put together a user interface where you can look at all that food spoilage data by location and by product type. So that's in the chat, and you can kind of peruse that on your own time after this presentation.
You can all see the slide.
I can see it.
Thanks. Okay.
So hello again, everybody. My name's Evelyn Trefon, and I operate a year-round fresh produce fruit and vegetable market. My goal is to sell as much Alaskan grown fruits and vegetables that I can get my hands on. I'm not I don't have enough time to grow it myself, but I try to import as much as I can from around the state and then sell it at like a farmer's market stand. Um, I started my business in 2014, and I also work full-time at the school as the administrative assistant. I am the language coordinator for our Yukston Language Revitalization Program since 2022 here in the Lake Iliamna area. I've been the New Haven Community Garden Coordinator, and I will be that again this summer. I'm also a board member of the Alaska Farmers Market Association, and I have one amazing daughter, and then we have four other girls that live with us too. And I've been a resident of New Haven since 2011. Again, I started my business in 2014 when I moved to New Haven. Well, I moved to Alaska in 2005 and lived in Anchorage for about 6 years, and then moved to New Haven, which is where my husband's from, in 2011. And when I moved here, I was the store manager for one of the local grocery stores, and realized how much of a problem and issue it was to get fresh produce in rural Alaska. I grew up in Kansas, and I mean, even in eastern Kansas, the food was abundant and it's super easy to access. You just go to the grocery store and get whatever you need. In Anchorage, it's pretty abundant as well. But when I moved out here to New Haven, I really realized that there was quite a lot of limitations if you're wanting certain produce at certain times of the year. And so I departed ways from that store, but that kind of inspired me to create this market with my best friend. And she would buy things at Costco and then have it shipped to me in Iliamna, and then I would just set it up in my car and literally drove door to door in our village, selling fruits and vegetables and bread and things out of the back of my car. And it worked really well for us. She got pretty busy at work and had to step away from the business, but I continued and I've kind of evolved it over the years. But I serve the villages of New Haven and Iliamna. I can ship around the Lake Iliamna area too, but shipping becomes kind of tricky just because of the price point of it. But it's a much appreciated service in our community, and I feel very privileged to be able to do this for so many years now. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this was my produce wagon. This was the first month of me doing it. So I would drive door to door selling fruits and vegetables out of the back of my car. My daughter, who is 12, I would just strap her into the car seat right behind me and give her a banana and hope for the best while we were going around the village, uh, selling fruits and vegetables to everybody. So, next slide. Like I said, over the years, I've been able to evolve my market into more of a farmer's market style where I was able to build up a reputation and just have the people come to me instead of me going to them, which is more time effective and also cost effective. So the first few years I set up at the clinic parking lot just because I was kind of the crossroads of Iliamna, New Haven. A lot of people would come around that way through that area because it has the clinic and the post office and it's on the way to the airport. And so it was just kind of a nice central location that was also free for me to utilize. And so I would set it up like a farmer's market style. And just to have everybody come to me and shop. Through the Alaska Farmers Market Association, I was able to become, with their help, I was able to become a SNAP authorized vendor. So I can also now accept SNAP at my market. And through a program through AFMA, I can also double the SNAP benefits. So people can use up to $40 of their benefits and have me match that through a reimbursement program through AFMA. And so they can get $80 worth of buying power for only $40 of their benefits, which in rural Alaska, I mean, the prices of produce is so expensive anyway. If whatever kind of bonus they can get, it just really helps in the family's budgets. In 2023, I was even able to triple match the first $20. So people are able to spend 40, match with $40 from AFA and $20 from our local clinic. So it enabled them to have $100 of buying power. And that was just from me asking the clinic, hey, would you guys be interested in matching even $20 of people's SNAP benefits? And they're like, yeah. And so, I mean, just enabling people to have that $100 buying power really helped with their monthly budgets, I think. And it was per day, so they could come to the market. I always have to have my market 2 times just to make it cost effective to sell as much as I can. So the first day they can come and do the matching, and then the second day they can come and do the matching again. So it isn't as much. The first day you're always going to get the best stuff because that's when there's the most of everything. But the second day you can always find more things too. So but yeah, so it's a great program, and I'm happy that AFMA's continue to try to fight for that program to get more funding for it to continue it another 5 years.
Evelyn, while we're talking about this, could you explain a little bit more about how your market is designated as a farmer's market?
Yeah, it's actually coming up in the next few slides.
Oh, my bad.
No worries. I'm not a traditional farmer's market. My market doesn't fit into the mold of a traditional farmer's market. The nationwide definition is to have 2 or more vendors set up in a farmer's market setting. And often it's just me, just selling my fruits and vegetables and whatever else I can acquire. So I order and ship from vendors from around Anchorage, mostly, well, from Alaska, mostly Anchorage, and I support as many locally grown and Alaska-made products as I can. Denali Dreams has been something that I sell year after year. It's their soaps and body oils, bath bombs, and people love it. It's something that you just don't find every day in the stores here. So people really appreciate it. And then also, I do get some tourists to the market too with our fishing lodges. So they like to come and purchase some of those more uniquely Alaskan items too. I try to purchase as much locally grown produce as I can. Port Ellsworth, which is a community uh, at the north end of Lake Clark, probably about 45 air miles from here, and Agiagik, which is about the same maybe 30 miles south of here. Both have pretty large farm and growing operations, but they grow a lot for the schools because our school lunch and breakfast program is no longer funded by our school district. So they've kind of evolved to just sell it or donate it to the school program directly. So there's not a lot of leftovers for me to purchase, which is great because that's what their goals is to support their community needs. But anytime they have extra leftovers, I'm always happy to buy it. But the only thing with that is that there's not really a discounted, even though it's so close, there's not really a discounted shipping price for me. So if I buy it from Anchorage or if I buy it from Port Ellsworth or Yaugic, it's the same cost point for per pound for shipping, which doesn't make a lot of financial sense for me, except for when the cook at a fishing lodge says, "Oh no, I want Lake Iliamna grown produce and I don't care the cost." Then I'm like, okay, well I can make that happen. So that's the only time. But otherwise it's like people aren't necessarily going to buy a Romanesco for $14 a head or something because that's what kind of comes out to because of the shipping prices and everything. So um yeah, freight prices have increased. If we could go back one more slide, sorry, Iva. Freight prices have increased 40% at least over the past 6 years in our area. Currently, the cheapest rate I can find is 95 cents per pound, and up to $1.25 a pound, depending on who I can ship with. And of course, logistics and coordination is the tricky part. If they only have the one flight, and especially in winter time, if they only have the one flight, you have to really have your ducks in a line to be able to make sure you make it on that flight. So it's not sitting there for days or weeks, and you got to check the weather and all the things. So yeah, freight prices is what drives my produce prices for sure. Here's the kind of the definitions of what a farmer's market is that AFMA has graciously defined markets as in Alaska because Alaska is so unique as compared to the rest of the lower 48. A farmer's market is a public, regularly occurring assembly at with local vendors. There's also a farm stand is defined as a farmer's market, a CSA, a food hub, and then I'm considered a remote specialty crop market, which is a public, reoccurring assembly of specialty crop vendors whose organizer is actively seeking local farm producers and products, selling directly to the consumer in the remote location of Alaska. And then this data is from 2024, so it's a little out of date, but it's still very relevant, I feel like. But there was 87 markets statewide that participate or that are in the AFMA's market directory, and there was a lot of local food being able to be purchased, as well as a lot of snap matching in 2024. And I think I know it only increased in 2025, and I'm very fortunate to be able to offer that to my community. And here's just some of the local produce that I was able to bring in. There's carrots and Brussels sprouts from Singing Nettle Farms in Palmer, which if you haven't had the carrots from Singing Nettle Farms, I was able to you need to, is what I'm trying to say. But I was able to bring them in again this season, and people were asking me, do you have the carrots? Do you have the carrots? Like they wouldn't even, they were the carrots. Like there was no question on which carrots they were talking about. And the kids, I would bring a bag of carrots to school, and they had dirt on them still. They weren't peeled, and they would just eat them raw. They're just the best carrots ever. But the Romanesco turnips and beets from Port Ellsworth Farm, and then also the clinic. That picture in the middle there is how I would set up my market for the clinic. And then this past year, I just decided to try it at my yard, and so I just have modified it and I just sell it from my yard because it's just one less hike or one less moving component of my market is if I just do it in my yard, I can just set it up and then take it down and store it And then communication is always key. So I communicate through my market signs, through Facebook posts, through an email list, because not everybody's on Facebook. A lot of people have gone away from Facebook over the past few years. So email's been huge. And then just having simple market flyers with your dates, just clear, concise communication on when, where, how, all the things. So that's my market, rain or shine, twice a week.
Evelyn, can I make one point to support what your discussion was about SNAP? I just want to show something really quick, which is that the SNAP benefit rates around the state are not always super well known, like how that works. And the way it works in Alaska is they have 20 stores in Anchorage that they're comparing to 40,000 stores in the lower 48. And then they establish what the urban Alaska price is above the lower 48. So Alaska gets a little bit more, about 30% more for the maximum household allotment. But then all of the communities here in green are set in a 1986 law. By law, SNAP views them as having the same food prices. This includes like Skagway and like other places that just clearly like don't make a ton of sense. It actually includes Cold Bay and Adak as well. And they have classified your communities, Evelyn, as rural one, or sorry, rural two. So rural two, I'll start with rural one. There's these other communities, sort of remote road system, everything else in the southeast, and then the villages in Kodiak. The assumption in SNAP is that food only costs 28% more in those communities than it does in Anchorage. The assumption in rural two is that food costs only 55% more for the thrifty food plan basket. I'm super convinced that's undercounting. And Nome, for example, is the same as Gamble and the outlying communities. Iliamna is in the same bin, for example, as Kaktovik. Wildly different, situations. So it's not granular at all. Nutrition North Canada actually judges this on a community level basis all the time through some data sharing agreements, and they're able to differentiate it much better. But Evelyn, I would ask you, does food in your community cost more or less than 55% more than Anchorage?
Um, that I don't know the percentage. I know Alaska Food Policy Council did a thing where it was like buy these 10 items or however many they were and put them into your basket and figure out what the total was. And in Homer, it
Hmm.
was like $60 approximately. And in my community, it was like $130 for the same similar items.
Yeah.
We can't ever match it to same for same. Oh yeah, Rachel said she's gonna find the screenshot to share it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. But yeah, it's what's offered in Anchorage isn't ever available exactly here in Iliamna, but as close as I could find, I mean that was about the
So it's
um
about 150% difference rather than a 55% difference. I mean, that's not strange. I mean, I did a thing with APM about Christmas food baskets, and in Nome, it was well over 100% more. And that's in Nome. Again, that's not in the villages outside of Nome. So I think this is super archaic and probably taking thousands per month potentially out of people's pockets in rural Alaska that might be able to spend more and have more. So I think this is something this community and broader should be paying attention to, and I'd love to work with some folks to try and write that. But thanks, Evelyn, for letting me interject with that.
yeah, absolutely, Mike. I guess one more thing that I'll mention is I've only lived in New Halen. I haven't lived in any other rural villages. So I can only speak of my experience here, but I know other villages, they have way more tougher time of getting fresh fruits and vegetables. There is a way high spoilage because of my business model. I get it in and then that day or next day I sell it. I have pretty low spoilage rates, honestly, just because I work with a really great wholesaler in Anchorage, and I also work with the small air carriers pretty closely. So I'm able to make those coordination points throughout the transportation process pretty tight, as far as when it leaves the wholesaler and gets to the airport here. So I'm really lucky about that. And I know that that isn't the case for most of rural Alaska, that most of rural Alaska doesn't have direct flights from Anchorage unless you are a large hub.
Yeah.
So Iliamna is and we have a paved runway, which is never happens in rural Alaska. We're super spoiled in Iliamna, which I fully know.
So if someone wanted to start a specialty produce market like what you have going, like what would you say is like the first step?
Well, if it's a market that would be in a village, I would definitely say no, go into it knowing you will not make money. I never host a market ever expecting to make a profit. I just try to break even, honestly, which I know is a horrible business model, but it works for me and it works for my community. So my business model is I try to break even. To cover all my costs for the freight and transportation and the cost of the goods. And then after that, if there's extra at the market, I just try to either my family consumes it, so I guess we literally eat the profits, you could say, or I give it away to families I know need a little extra help. Working at the school, I kind of have that knowledge, or I reach out to the church and let them know, or ask them if they know of somebody who could use a little extra that week or that month. Because everybody's struggling, especially in rural Alaska, with all the uncertainties and all the different things that are happening.
Amber's asking how much time do you spend on logistics?
Um, there's often many nights around 11, 12 o'clock that I am sending in my produce orders for the next day. Um, and then just, calling and setting up. I mean, it's just I honestly don't know is the answer. I just do. That's how I live my life. I just keep doing and keep moving. So if I know I'm gonna have a market, let's see. I would say probably an hour to get the order in, and then just a phone call to the air taxi saying, "Hey, what time's your flights? Will this work?" Because I usually ship about 500 to 600 pounds of freight when I do make an order into the village. Um, so just making sure that they have space available to not only receive it at their end in Anchorage for storage purposes, but also make sure they have transport room on the airplane to ship it out to me. Because if they have a full flight of 9 passengers, those 9 passengers also have their own personal freight. So I just need to make sure that they have space available to make sure they have room for my 500 to 600 pounds of produce. So I would say a few hours definitely. I think the most time consuming thing is because I want to offer the best prices I can to my community is making the prices and entering it into the my POS system, which I use Square exclusively because it's just such an easy thing to update and use and operate. So I think that's the most time consuming thing is figuring out the prices of the products because they change so much. Avocados, green grapes, bananas have not really changed much. They've been pretty much the same price, but they have gone up over the past 3 months for sure. But avocados and green grapes, their prices go up and down all the time. So it's just really monitoring that and adjusting for that too.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to throw out there that Rural Cap has been interested in like supporting Evelyn to share this model and like help someone in a different community do a similar sort of project. So if anyone is interested in standing up a specialty produce market in a rural community, or even if you have like a different idea for how to improve fresh fruit, fresh produce access in your community, please reach out to me and we can talk and maybe try to get some funding, try to make it happen. Um, I think, just yeah, what Evelyn's saying about it not being very profitable could be a great thing for like a local government to take on, like a tribe or a municipal government, kind of like as a public service, or I don't know. So open to your ideas and just here to support. And I put my email in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out.